Ladies and gentlemen, please notice that exits are conveniently located at the front and rear of this auditorium. When leaving the theater, we suggest that the exit at the front of the auditorium will allow you easier access to the parking areas. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Field.
And I'm Mike Butler.
And you're listening to Forgotten Cinema, now showing.
Ooh.
Something new we're doing. So we're just it's going to be a short one. We're going to do a quick review of a new movie that's out or coming out, kind of give you our thoughts. We were able to see this movie that we're going to be talking about today ahead of a time. So it releases on November 18th on streaming on Amazon, Fandango, and Vimeo On Demand. I'm talking about the documentary Maserati, 100 Years Against All Odds.
That's right.
Right. So we were approached by TriCoast Entertainment, who is responsible for the distribution of Maserati, this movie. I'm not sure if they might have bought it or they produced it, but they are responsible for putting it out. Mm-hmm. And they asked us if we'd be interested in taking a look at it and just kind of like giving our thoughts. And of course we said, yeah, sure. We'd like to point out that we are not being paid by TriCoast Entertainment to talk about this movie. There is nothing coming our way in order for us to give a favorable review. This is just basically our opinion, our thoughts on the movie. And if this is something you're interested in seeing, maybe this 15 to 20 minute podcast, however long we go, will help you determine if you should watch it.
That's right.
All right. So Butler, why don't you break down? I mean, I kind of said it was a documentary, but why don't you give a little overview of it and then we'll kind of get into it.
All right. The documentary is obviously, you can guess by the title, 100 Years Against All Odds. It's about the first 100 years of the Maserati car company. The Maserati car company was established in 1914. So it talks about its place then when the Maserati brothers, Alfieri, Bindo, Carlo, Ettore, and Ernesto started the Maserati car company and started racing Grand Prix cars. It goes through their history from, World War I and how they kind of stopped for a while back into starting production on their cars right afterward. The races and the Grand Prix they used to win. All the race cars used to sell to people that were interested. So they would sell private race cars to people who would race them privately, not necessarily part of the Maserati company. All the wins and records that they established, which were quite a few. It also talks about their history of, I don't want to say failures, but when they kind of the low points in their company's career, losing money, squandering money. They kept winning records and making great cars, but the money wasn't always coming in. So it talks about how they were bought by Adolfo Orso and his family in the 40s, and then their withdrawal from racing after certain tragedies in the mid 50s and early 60s in racing circuits, and how they stopped participating in the racing circuit, but still providing private racing cars for people. And then all the way through being owned by Citroën, which was a French company in the late 60s. And it's kind of experimental phase, I guess you would say, in the 70s and 80s, having to be losing money, having been sold again to Fiat, and its history with Fiat and Ferrari after that. So it really spans the whole history of Maserati and goes through their ups and downs and talks about how, even though the cars might have been great racing vehicles and achieved amazing speed, and how race car drivers, and they do interview quite a few very famous old school race car drivers, loved them, that success on the racetrack isn't necessarily translates into success as a kind of sales company, and what they did to kind of struggle but always survive. No matter what happened, they kept on going.
Right. I think it's fair to point out, you talked about how they're failures, but I mean, when you're around for 100 years, you're not going to be always up.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean? So you're going to have to survive, or I guess get through the low times. And every company has that. So that's nothing different that Maserati had to face in terms of being the company that it is now, coming from where it started.
Right.
It's intriguing that we are doing that. This movie's coming out because I mean, I'm going to bring it up because I know you didn't watch it. I just watched Ford vs. Ferrari.
I wasn't able to. Thanks, Alex.
That's the Matt Damon movie, and Christian Bale. And we're not here to talk about that movie, but very similarities in terms of Ford basically entered into the racing circuit to try to improve their image, to get them to sell more cars. They were just selling, cars for family guys and family men. They
were kind of the opposite of Maserati.
Right. So it's interesting that Maserati still was facing kind of like the same idea. Like, get into racing car, you get into racing, you win awards, but you're trying to translate that into sales, into like getting people into like the sex appeal of the car.
Right.
So just I'm only bringing that other movie up just to kind of like the similarities between the two car companies. Now,
good job, TriCoast. This is excellent release day.
I will say this: I am not a car guy. I absolutely not a car guy. I don't really. It's not something that I'm into. I don't really dig it. in terms of like, like, oh, wow, I'd read up on it, anything like that. I don't know if you are.
I'm kind of a car guy. I really like different cars. I go to the New York Auto Show a lot. I enjoy cars for kind of like the sex appeal of a car.
Sure.
Like, that car is awesome. I like that. The speed of a car, I'm really interested in what its top speed is. But I don't know much about, the technical aspect of vehicles.
Yeah, well,
my father is big on that.
My 7-year-old knows more than me, because he reads he watches Chris Fix videos on stuff like that.
You should have had him watch the Maserati.
I should have. When he saw a recent commercial, he said, "Can I be on one?" I'm like, all right, relax. So anyways, but I wanted to preface by saying, like, if you are into cars, you are into Italian, especially Italian car makers,
right?
Because for those who don't know, Maserati is located in Italy. If you are into that, I mean, this is probably a really good doc for you, because it does, as Butler pointed out throughout his intro of the movie, it really is about the history of Maserati. It plays like that. It's not really, I would say, a dramatic documentary in terms of kind of like The Kid Stays in the Picture about Robert Evans, who recently passed away. Just kind of like telling this. It doesn't kind of weave a fictional narrative. It just kind of lays it all out here from, this is where we're from. This is how we've gone through the decades. And it's dramatic in terms of like when you're listening and paying attention to it.
Right.
But there's no really, like, a lot of times people will mix genres in docs. They'll have a doc, but they'll have like,
the recreations inside of it.
Like
this
that.
is not the recreations.
It is not.
It might have been nice, but I do like the footage when they like do the racetrack footage from the 20s and 30s, and they transpose that with here's the racetrack today.
Sure.
And they do the split screen. I thought that was kind of cool.
Right. I think that like I said, I think if you're into cars, especially if you're into international car makers, I mean, this is definitely a doc you should check out, because it does lay out everything that Maserati had to deal with in terms of, like you talked about, being bought by several companies. And,
yes.
and towards, they're still owned by Fiat. They're their own now.
They are owned by Fiat still.
Yeah. But they were owned by Fiat, but Fiat had also owned Ferrari, and they let Ferrari take over Maserati in terms of like their production. But then Ferrari has stepped away. So now Maserati is basically, they're still owned by Fiat,
but they're their own.
Right.
Yeah, they're no longer being assisted by. Well, I mean, they might be a little bit, but they're no longer a Ferrari like offshoot now.
Correct.
They're back to being their own thing.
Is there anything that jumped out in particular? Like, I know we both had the same thought. Go ahead, because we both had the same car we enjoyed.
Oh well, obviously the car that most stood out to me was the Boomerang.
Yeah,
from the 80s. The Boomerang is awesome. The glass bodied. It's not a full glass body, but its main doors were fully glass.
Wide. It's really
very
wide. Yeah.
It almost looks like a DeLorean if you kind of cyberpunked the DeLorean.
If you pushed it down.
Oh, it's flatter. Yeah.
Yeah. If you took the DeLorean and pushed it, like, I don't think I could ever fit in any of these cars because I'm 6'4".
You could. Yeah. You'd be surprised. Yeah. Like, my father owns now, like, it's always been his dream to have a Corvette. So he's finally gotten a Corvette. And you'd be surprised. Like, when I saw it, I'm short. I'm sure people have seen from our videos. I'm shorter. And even when I got up to the Corvette, I was like, I am not going to be comfortable in this thing. But then you sit down, and the way it's scooped back, you're not only comfortable, but you don't feel like you're lying down. Gotcha. And it's very impressive how that works.
Going back to the Boomerang, they talked a little bit about how the inside dash was all different. And I didn't really I wanted to know more.
I wanted to see the dashboard, which they didn't really show.
They showed like the wheel, but they showed the wheel had all these buttons and knobs on it.
Everything was one piece, which I thought was amazing. Right, yeah. And everything was on one dial, which was cool.
So there was definitely some stuff that I wanted to know more of. Again, being somebody who's not, well-versed in cars, I guess maybe that's probably why. But then the doc probably would have. The documentary is only like an hour and a half, which is good. It's it's tight, it's quick.
Right.
You don't want a 2.5 hour documentary.
I can see this being cut down a little bit, like maybe cut some of the racing stuff down, and like I can see this on like the History Channel.
Oh,
this is something like if I was scrolling through and I was bored back when I still had cable and I was like flipping through. If this was on and I saw like the old school racing footage, I'd be like, that's kind of interesting.
Well, maybe that's something after it gets, because it's getting like I said, it's getting a streaming release on Amazon, Fandango, and Vimeo on demand starting Monday the 18th of November, which I'm pretty sure that this is when this episode is coming out.
I think so, yeah.
But when you go to IMDb, it's set for January 15th, 2020. So that might be like kind of like the release into theaters. But I wouldn't be surprised if down the road you start seeing it on History Channel, or you start seeing some version of it.
It's got a lot of interesting stuff about it. I mean, other stuff that popped out to me was one of the first times that the company started to have an issue. I can't remember what year. I think it was sometime in the 40s or 50s. And Italy was very worried about all those people losing jobs because they weren't doing so well as a country. Like the economy wasn't doing so great. So they actually bailed out Maserati, which I thought was very interesting because
that's when they put that other guy in charge, right? They
convinced him to get it. But what I thought was interesting was I liked the parallels between that stepping in, and then also, obviously, not too long ago, we had a huge crisis with our automotive
do it all the time.
industries, and the government had to step in to help them.
They just gave him money.
Well, they gave them a lot of money. They got a big bailout.
Yep.
And what I thought was interesting was even back then, Italy did the same thing for their car makers.
Sure.
So I liked that kind of comparison with like everything just comes back around.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Sure. Well, you gotta you have to help the economy along. So.
Right.
Oh yeah. No doubt.
And I also really like when you talk about cars and you talk about their top speed. I like how a lot of the older cars reach top speeds of like 180, 190. And then you see in the 60s and 70s, it goes down to 150, 160. Oh, now it's back up to 180 because of how once they started adding all the different environmental stuff to the vehicles, the top speeds all went down.
Yeah.
And now that technology has improved, the top speeds are finally going back up to what they were, 60, 70, 80 years ago.
Sure.
So I think that's really interesting when an older car has a top speed the same as a newer car.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. Do you have anything that I have not brought up that you want to talk about?
I guess.
I think. I like I said, much of my notes were just basically like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool, because I don't know a lot about it. So in that, I learned some stuff, which was cool. I didn't understand. Not that I'm being negative. I didn't understand opening the dock with the boat.
That would have been, if I had a comment, that would have been my one thing. I didn't
see how it fit. I get it was a Maserati boat. I get that. But they never, unless I missed it, they never really talked about them in the boat building business or anything like that.
They talk about the boats, but it's just a
maybe I missed that.
It's just a shorter. It's like maybe 5 minutes, and they talk about boats.
Okay.
And they talk about, this is the Maserati boat. They started with power race boats, and then they go into new technology for competitive sailboats, yacht racing, and stuff like that. And so that's what that was all about. But I thought when you showed that at the beginning, I thought that was going to take more of a forefront. Like, hey, Maserati's also got boats. And then it ended up not being much. So I would have thought that a beginning where they show the old school races, because that was really what the film was about, is a lot of their racing heritage.
I think a lot of these
boats confused me.
Car companies started that way, right? Especially overseas.
I think overseas, yeah. But I think I would have liked to have seen more of that than the boat. The boat was a little.
I just didn't understand.
It was a little strange to start off with the boat.
I think,
although I get the boat and the trident, maybe that's what they were going for.
Well, they got that image from
the statue. Neptune, right?
I think maybe I wanted more to know. Maybe I wanted to know more about where Maserati, like other things that they were building, they were creating.
When they talk about, we do more than just cars. And it's
right,
like, okay.
right, yeah. So then. Again, though, I may be asking for
a longer documentary at that point. Although you could take some of the cut down some of the racing and just add. But I would have been interested to see the engine.
Sure.
They showed the other engines. Why can't you show the engine of the powerboat? I would have been interested to see what their racing boat engine looked like and how large. It must have been huge. It must be huge. I'd like to see that.
They talk a lot about the sex appeal of a car.
It's Italy, man. That's all they're all about. The shape and the form.
Which is fine. I just thought that was very interesting.
But in the end, it's all math.
I think it was very interesting to just kind of hear them talk about, and it's nothing new about talking about a vehicle in terms of its sexual prowess or its sexual nature of what people feel when they are in the car, what people feel when they see the car. I get that. It was interesting to hear that.
When I was in college, I can't remember what class it was. It was a class on marketing? I don't remember, but it was a class where we watched this documentary, and it was all about this man who no one really knows his name. I mean, he's got a name, but he's like one of the richest guys ever. And every company pays him to figure out psychological stuff about how they're designing things. And it's always sex or childhood, motherhood, fatherhood, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And how your design needs to influence like breasts or the butt or the back or a baby's bottle or something that reminds you of something like safe and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he does all the psychological work with these different focus groups and then gives them to artists to create their designs. And that's a lot of what goes into making cars, which I find that's very fascinating.
Well, you look at any commercial, you see what they're selling depending upon the car that they have. You see what they're trying to say with, hey, if you're in this car, you'll be with this person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
As always, you'll say sex sells.
Absolutely. That'll probably never change.
The other thing I think was interesting, which I really liked, is they show a couple of things where Maserati announces new cars toward the end. And I think one of them looks like the New York Auto Show, and I think I was at that New York Auto Show.
Were you there?
I wasn't there for that unveiling, but I think I was there in that, because that showroom, I was like, That's why I went to that year. There's other stuff that I thought was interesting. Like they do mention how they did make engines and stuff for the war effort during World War II, which would have been Mussolini, which I thought was interesting that they even mentioned, although they kind of gloss over it.
Of course they did. Yeah.
Because you don't want to really talk about
Yeah.
it. It's like VW doesn't want to talk about it and stuff like that.
I get that. I mean, that's tough.
But I like that they didn't necessarily just ignore it. They talk about how they had to pause and do stuff for the war effort.
I think everybody on both sides had to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere. I mean, you're a company that's 100 years old. You have 2 world wars you got through. I mean,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have to learn how to adapt and change. And basically, your government's telling you got to start making these now. I mean, I would assume you have government contracts, but also I would assume they're saying, cut us a break here.
I mean, I also assume when it's Mussolini asking, he's not really asking.
Exactly. This is true.
It's probably like, okay, yes, I don't want to die.
This is true.
And then obviously I enjoyed all the different race car drivers. I liked that a lot of these race car drivers who drove in the 50s and 40s are telling these different stories about driving the Maseratis. I thought that was kind of cool. Obviously, it's a Maserati documentary, so they're all gushing over their Maseratis. Of course. But I thought it was really interesting to hear them talk about stuff. I liked when one of the race car drivers was talking about one of the some kind of South Asian royalty. I can't remember. I didn't write it down, unfortunately. That's bad on me. But I liked that when the race car driver started telling the story about how he's got a car for every girl that he brings with him. And he always brings a girl, and he always has a girl in a car with him. So then he's always got like 3 or 4 cars. But I like a lot of the stories about how that's what Maserati used to do before they really made a lot of street cars, was make cars for individuals. So later on, they talk about how the Shah of Persia wanted a car purchased, but the 5000 GT was a prototype, but that's what he wanted. It was the fastest street car at the time in 1958. And he wouldn't buy prototypes because he didn't trust them. He didn't feel like they were real cars. So to convince him to buy it, Maserati just made another 5000 GT and said, hey, look, there's 2 of them. And that was, they didn't even lie to him. They just said, hey, look, there's 2 of them. And that was good enough for him. And then he bought the other G5000. Then they took that 5000 and they put the engine in other cars and they'd sell them, which I thought was really interesting too. They take their race car ideas, slap another body on them, and then, say, okay, this is a street car now.
Yeah,
which was cool.
Well, they seem there's a certain point in their history where they seem to become a designer car company.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, maybe that's a way to kind of keep going. But I mean, you change hands 3 times and you have 3 different owners, and it's. I think one of the things at the end of the doc, I don't remember the CEO they're talking to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how we still survive. We survived. We're still here. We're still going strong. That's
what he's
idea.
interested in.
Right,
yeah.
Right. We're still. It's been 100 years, and everything that's happened. We're still here, which is cool. And it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years with them. See where they go. If how their sales increase and their car designs, and
that'd be interesting to see, because racing and speed and power has always been their thing, regardless of the design. And it'd be interesting to see how they go forward in the new kind of this energy efficient kind of era.
Sure, yeah.
Like electric cars and all that are becoming more popular. How's the Maserati going to adapt to that in terms of power and horsepower and speed, but also still reliability and keeping the energy efficiency that you look for? Because a lot of these cars, when they go over them, are not very energy efficient. They even talk about the Ghibli, which had 2 gas tanks because it couldn't last for like any time at all. So they complained about how much fuel it sucked up. So they just put a second gas tank, which couldn't have been safe, on one on each end. Although 0 to 60 in 6.8 seconds is pretty good.
Again, I'm not the car guy. All right. Yeah. So if anybody is interested in checking this out, you can catch it digitally streaming starting November 18th at what did I say? Prime?
You said Prime.
Prime. Fandango and Vimeo on demand. So if you have any access to those, feel free to jump on there. If you like what we had to say, or if you'd like us to do more of these now showings, please feel free to hit us up at ForgottenCinemaPodcast.com. We got a contact form right there. You can email us at ForgottenCinemaPod@gmail.com. So, we're always, if you want to hear some of our episodes where we talk about our other podcasts, our Forgotten Cinema podcast, for those new to this, is more about older films that people don't talk about that much anymore. Not super older. We do run the gamut from, maybe like 3 years ago to 40 years ago. Right now we are in our 3rd season. So, and we, still going strong. So if you're interested in like movies like Near Dark or Collateral, The Family Man, that's coming out. So, check us out. We're at, like I said, we're at ForgottenCinemaPodcast.com, or you can find us wherever podcasts are available: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. Actually, I enjoyed this. I think we should do this again for another movie.
Absolutely. Like we said, this is something that came to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. I know we've mentioned it. If you listen to our podcast, we talk about us wanting to do spinoffs for a while. And this is one of the spinoff ideas we have is Forgotten Cinema now showing. So let us know what you guys think. Yeah, because we would like to do more of these.
Absolutely, and thank you to TriCoast Entertainment for reaching out and giving us the opportunity to check this out ahead of time. We appreciate it, and
absolutely. I'll expect my Maserati in the driveway at some point soon. I'm not picky. Any kind will be all right.
I'm not a car guy either, but I'll take one as well. That's fine. All right, so thanks for listening. I'm Mike Field.
I'm Mike Butler,
and this has been Forgotten Cinema now showing.